that's for me, living life so merrily. It's so easy, can't you see? Polka, polka, that's for me. Polka, polka, everyone come along, it's lots of fun.
Welcome back, Miguel Dorati here with another edition of the Talk and Shoot podcast. And I've got frequent guest Mike Davis joining me. And Dave Sidursky's joining us for the second time here. And that inevitably means that the subject today is boxing. Mike has been joining us for many of these podcasts here on boxing and classic boxing. And Dave Sidursky joined us last week for a spectacular podcast on the greatest boxer of all time. He had some contributions with a simulator, and we had a great discussion here. I wanted to bring him back here. He runs Mythical Boxing on Facebook, and he's a lifelong boxing enthusiast, as we describe him here. I wanted to bring Dave back along here so that we can get more into just a discussion and talking as opposed to running through numbers in a simulator and stuff. Dave, welcome aboard.
Hey, glad to be here, Mike. Miguel and Mike. Hope you're all doing well this morning.
Yep, it's his birthday too, so we're gonna try to give him a hard time throughout the podcast if we can. Here, we'll see how it goes. The subject for today's podcast is tough guys, and we love boxing, from all eras. And this is a discussion I think that similar to the greatest boxer of all time. This is an ongoing discussion that we're not really going to decide anybody is tougher than anybody else, but we're going to be able to talk about certain guys and certain styles. I don't think, the idea is here, we're bringing a fighter or a boxer to either a bar fight or a fight in an alley or a fight in, a ditch in World War I. All these are options, and that classifies, you're looking, I think, for a tough guy. You're looking for a guy with bottom, guts, balls, whatever you want to call it. That aspect of it. So, like I said, if not to get into arguments, but if Mayweather is the best fighter in the world or the best fighter of all time, if that's the case, he still wouldn't be somebody I would take to this particular fight because that's his style doesn't lend itself for what we're talking about. I don't want to say fight to the death, but imagine in your head that fights in the 1880s used to go down with an unlimited rounds to a finish. You're not killing the guy, but you're finishing him. This guy can't continue. And that's the kind of fight I'm talking about, like an old school fight, not a 12-round sport. Dave, I'm going to let you lead off because I know that we've exchanged an interesting list of guys, eclectic list of guys, varied list of guys. So I'm going to let you lead off with your favorite, and we'll start the discussion from there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I think a guy who once knocked out a horse has to be on this list.
Okay.
The great Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran.
Okay. I can't agree more. That's a great choice, and we always talk about him tough that way. Dave, take it away.
Okay. He was perhaps the greatest lightweight ever, holding the title for nearly 7 years. He also won titles at welterweight, junior middleweight, and middleweight. He started his career at age 16 and fought competitively for over 30 years. Psyched up the great Sugar Ray Leonard. Defeated, among others, Hiroshi Kobayashi, Ken Buchanan, Esteban DeJesus, Guts Ishimatsu, Ray Lampkin, Sal Mombi, Carlos Palomino, Monroe Brooks, Edwin Pirouette, Coquino Cuevas, Davey Moore, Iran Barkley, and Jorge Castro. And he also got the better of Rocky Balboa in their sparring sessions.
Yes, he did.
Now the thing
he literally fought everybody.
And everybody, if you're old enough to have seen Duran, I think everybody at this on this podcast is. You can understand why you bring him to this fight because it isn't only the list of guys he won and the elite level of which he won, but here you're bringing a guy who's not only like in the discussion as one of the best in his weight class or the greatest of all time for a certain point. You're also bringing a guy who really always fought as if the fight was to the death, as if the fight was something where he was not going to try to leave it in the ring or win on points or any of those types of things. So I'm impressed with the choice. Mike, you want to give us your contribution?
Roberto actually. I mean, let's continue that. He Do we agree on that, Miguel?
Yeah.
I remember being in Costa Rica a few times and still hearing like recent Roberto Duran stories. Like, you know, he's a guy that's constantly got his foot on the gas pedal. It doesn't seem to be tapping that brake too much, even in this late stage in life.
You know, you love the party animals. It's funny, but I have seen him in the last couple of years passing through here, and you know, if I say he weighed 260, probably about 80 pounds of that are his head, and it's just a bloating kind of, you know, massiveness that comes with old age and abuse, I think. So he is still running around and, you know, not wheelchair bound or anything like that, and he still has more or less his wits about him. And he's celebrated as a celebrity in Panama, and he probably lives pretty well. I don't think he's rolling in millions, but he's not dying of hunger either.
That's good. That's healthy. You know, I always like to hear that when, you know, former champions somehow manage to, you know, maintain some sort of semblance of financial stability, and I kind of got that too. I hear that about Julio Cesar Chavez as well. You know, he's still doing well for himself. It makes me happy. Well, my choice is an Eastern Bloc guy, and you know, boxing wise, although he was a world champion, Vasily Jirov is my pick. I remember as a child watching him, and you just saw that cold look in his eye, and it just permeated through the TV, and it scared me. And then you started like hearing stories about him. You know, and this is like before the internet and stuff like that. So, you know, the type of stories you would hear was, well, he's Kazakhstani, and you know, as we all know, you know, them, Russia, everyone else was constantly at war with each other. So he's one of 5 children, and the son of whose mother was an Olympic runner. And right when the Eastern Bloc was kind of fragmenting, the dad says, "You know what? I'm out of here. You know, I just take these 5 kids. Good luck, hon." It takes off, which obviously makes it very difficult for everybody involved. And the mother, at one time, had fame, said, I can't have my kids starve to death, and left her young child on the steps of a trainer named Alexander Apachinsky, who for all intents and practical purposes is a complete and total sadist. And Pachinsky, you know, from the research I've done, had a lot of unorthodox drills that was done because he was fought in numerous wars, probably suffered from PTSD, and just wanted his students to be prepared. And what he did with his boxers was nothing short of phenomenal, and Jirov obviously being one of them. In 1996, he won a gold medal over Antonio Tarver, who in a previous year bested him. That was during like the paddle decision. So, and everyone said that Jirov legitimately won. Tarver wasn't credited for a lot of points scored. He was a cruiserweight champion, but you know, unfortunately, at that time, when Evander Holyfield left that division, it kind of left anyone of any credibility. It wasn't a lot. It wasn't easy to make a name for yourself. Essentially, like a couple news reports that I had read said, it was kind of like being the fattest elephant at the circus. You know, oh wow, you know, he's a cruiserweight champion, but at the end of the day, you know, no one really cared. He didn't have a lot of fan favorite, but he was 38 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw. The reason I'm picking him is based on Alexander's training and the stories that I had heard. Initially, one of the first things, you know, that was widely known was that he would have his students row miles into a lake, and at the end of it, in the middle of the lake, he'd throw one of the kids overboard, or throw the kids overboard, and then he would motor back to shore, and that was his way of showing them that they had to finish, and you know, if they died, you know, if they stopped swimming, that they would die. He was trying to eliminate fear from their lives.
It's also nice that he cared to teach his students how to swim.
Right. Another thing, a part of his training was he would have a narrow hallway with a small door at the end of it, and he would have a German Shepherd, in his hand. He would tell the kids to run as fast as he could to the end of the hallway, and he'd release the dog, I should say. And Jirov said that he'd get stitches every once in a while from the dog chewing on him, but he got smart, and he would wrap a rope around his hand, and he would try to, when the dog was biting him or jumping for him, he would turn around with this rope, and he would try to catch the dog in between his mouth so the dog couldn't bite him.
It's nice.
That's a little crazy.
You think?
That is awesome. I think another choice is, it's funny, I don't think you can go wrong in general when you're talking about like a stereotype or whatever. You got to have an Eastern European guy over here because there's just the mentality of it,
And then a third one that I had heard, and this is documented online. I have been fascinated with Jirov ever since I was a child, and through the boxing channels here, one person relayed this to me as well. Apparently, he had all these kids sleeping in like bunk beds and pretty much squalor. Barely able to feed them, but he wanted them to be tough. So one kid a week he would pick, and that kid at night would be able to beat up one other child, and while he was sleeping. And essentially, it was all of these things were to remove fear, always protect yourself. Think when the situation seems to be at its most bleak. And Jirov embodied that type of training. Like when you looked into that cold blue eye of his, and you saw the look on his face, it was a person that was not afraid to die, gonna react exactly the way you're supposed to in adverse situations. And that's not something you really kind of learn. That's something you become when you get to the level that Jirov was, both physically and athletically and mentally. I mean, that fight against James Toney, he was outclassed in that bout, and he refused to give up. It was an incredibly impressive performance, by somebody that was outclassed, and it didn't matter. He was going to die trying to win that fight. And, you don't see that nowadays, guys willing to die in that ring. And Jirov certainly embodied that, and is somebody I respect as a person. And, when interviewed, and Miguel, at least you try to track him down for a future interview. When interviewed, he happily talks about it, is glad he went through it. It's like, no, it made me a better fighter, made me a better person. I think training like that should exist nowadays. He's like pro-child abuse, having been the poster child for someone that was beaten.
Like I said, the Eastern Europeans, they have a different value of life, I've noticed. And I've been over to Russia and some of those countries many, many times, and with athletes and stuff. Crossing over to MMA, you talk about that cold look. And, perhaps the greatest MMA fighter of all time, you have Fedor Emelianenko there, a Russian, who embodied that cold look, you know what I mean? Not to digress too much, but I had an exchange with Fedor one time. I walked into they were at a bar. I walked into the bar, and it was alone. They were alone. It was Fedor, his manager Vadim, and the promoter, who was Vlad. And they were all, having a meeting and talking. And I came in, and I was behind them. Their backs are all to me. And I went, Vlad, and it was actually Fedor that I noticed. They all turned around, but I watched Fedor. And Fedor, he looked at me, and I saw him go and look at me from head to toe. And it was the kind of thing where I could actually feel like he's got to be like the Terminator, and there's like a little computer thing saying to him, no danger, no danger, no danger. That's really how I felt. I could hear, he opened and closed his eyes, I could hear the moisture of his eye, and it was like a slee stack sound of his eyes and closed. I was so focused on it. It was a really scary moment, but the guy meant me no danger either, but he was just a scary, scary man. And Jirov,
certainly capable of it, right?
Yeah, Jirov has that same makeup, I think, you know.
Well, I think Oleg Tatarov does too, you know, on the MMA side. But Jirov, I mean, like, a lot of these Eastern Bloc guys, like, you don't know about their training because, one, Jirov immigrated to the United States almost immediately. So, and he really tried to, like, assimilate and communicate and tell stories and be involved. You know, he really wanted to be an American star, and he wasn't translating, unfortunately. But, he was up front and forward, like, oh, you guys do this type of training? Well, this is what I used to do. And, you know, the other Eastern Bloc, you know, fighters that we're talking about actually experience those types of things, but their coldness doesn't allow them to let you know what it is they went through.
Yeah, there's a barrier there.
He gave us a peek into that, and it's something I appreciated. And if I'm in a ditch in World War I, I can't imagine having somebody next to me other than someone that clearly is prepared for the situation, and that would be him.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna hit with a relatively modern guy that I think we've probably all seen as well. I'm gonna start off with a quote I found of his. This is translated from Spanish, but I like punching. I like fists. I don't like dancing like Floyd Mayweather. I like to stand in front of another man and split his face open, and have mine split open. And that is Edwin Valero of Venezuela. Now, he's one of boxing's recent tragedies. He came to a horrible end, suicide, killed his wife.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think one of the things that we can talk about here is that these guys, that the type of person that you're making, you know, they have to go through certain experiences in life, I think, that make you that hard and that tough. And this kid was legitimately absolute impoverished, homeless, 5-year-old thief stealing for food in his, you know, when he was a young man on the streets of Caracas, and from complete and abject poverty. And somehow within that, he also has the discipline to take himself through really what was on its way to being a Hall of Fame career. He died in the middle of his career still, with a lot of time left. He was a world champion. He was 27-0. He'd knocked everybody out. And when they had stepped up his level of competition, he had risen to the occasion. But the story that really brings out for me the guy's mentality and the kind of no-quit attitude that you want in a fight like what we're talking about, like a street fight and stuff, is Valero also had some medical problems. Aside from all the personal problems inside like that, he also had a couple of medical problems where he had been brought to the United States. He'd been fighting, first let's say he was spotted in Venezuela, obviously, and considered a talent. He was hooked up with a couple of Mexicans that brought him to the United States, and he fought in the States a few times. And then on his way back and forth, he's now coming through this. He winds up suspended for some medical problem. He had some type of problem on his brain or on his skull, like a mark or something, that caused him to actually be suspended. Fights canceled, he's never going to fight again, and that sort of stuff. And here's a guy with little, schooling, little preparation. He's now in the United States. He probably thought he'd die in a barrio in Venezuela. He's been traveling, he's now has a little bit of money and stuff, but the preparation and stuff, he's out there. And now the commissions have literally taken all that away from him. And the next day after that was announced, he was in the gym at 7 o'clock in the morning training. So that's what I don't know how you bottle that and give it to other fighters and things. But, if there was ever a moment to take a day off or just focus on something else or even just, go lament and drown your sorrows, it was that day, because everything he had was taken away from him, and he was still in the gym the next day at 7 a.m.
That's just who he was. That's who he was.
And the fighting and stuff, he'd fought 1,000 times on the streets, 1,000 times in as a child and as a youth coming up and stuff. So this was, absolutely a walk in the park for him, the sport of boxing, and I think when he talks about getting his face split open and stuff like that, if you look at his fights, especially the last few where he had the world champion. He was split open in a ghastly fashion in one of those title defenses, and he came back. I believe it was against DeMarco. He came back and actually, took the guy out, and that fight should have been stopped on a cut, and would have probably been stopped on a cut afterwards. So he's one of those guys that I never saw him quit in a fight. I saw him use fighting to change his life, use his skill to change his life, and I think he was well aware of the differences. I think he was well aware of what it took, because when it comes down to it, you could be a natural all you want, but I don't know that you naturally walk into a boxing ring and become a world champion. I think you take some natural talent and somebody's got to craft it, and you have to be open to it. You can't. There's a discipline involved. You just at the highest level, you can't just walk in there and not be ready. And he also had that. He also had that discipline and preparation when he had the focus and he came into it. So I've always been impressed by Valero, and there are going to be people that criticize him because of the way he came to an end and stuff, and people prefer not to talk about him. But I think he goes into a totality of boxing's tragedies and stuff, and actually what he accomplished in the ring and stuff is a great story. I would want him in there with me.
You can almost argue where, all right, well, the state said he couldn't box anymore. It didn't deter him. Eventually time or other outside circumstances tell you it's over. And it appears to me, and this is just obviously me scratching the surface level, it appears like, that time came. Like he was told no, and he realized he couldn't do it anymore. And, like you said, he went down a tragic path that unfortunately a lot of guys do.
No, the details are psycho. I mean, he killed his wife. He suicided in jail while they were holding him, and it gets worse from there. He had substance abuse problems and stuff. I mean, I'm not painting him as a good guy. I'm painting him as a good guy to have next to you in a street fight.
Right. Well, I'll tell you another guy that kind of comes to mind. And
well, it's going to be Dave's turn, Mike. I'm going to ask you to hold on. Dave, I'm going to let you get into number 2 there.
The next guy?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to go with Marvelous Marvin Hagler, whose birthday happens to be today. He was truly an old school guy. He just looked mean with that shaven skull and the goatee.
yeah, he did.
He had the highest knockout percentage ever for any middleweight champion in boxing history. You could hit this guy with a ring post and you wouldn't move him. Tommy Hearns wasn't able to do it. John Mugabe wasn't able to do it. Benny Briscoe, you can go all the way down the line. He had a record of 62-3-2. It really, arguably, it could have been 66-1. 4 of those 5 blemishes were disputed. That fight with Tommy Hearns, that was a thing of beauty, just a thing of beauty. And bloodied, he was not far from being stopped on cuts, and he just dug down and put Tommy away.
Absolutely,
it was an amazing thing to watch.
Yep. Now, and there's another guy with the cut. He said, "Let me finish this fight," and didn't take a way out when he may have had one. I don't think you can go wrong with Marvin. And here's the thing: is this list could be 1,000 because there's a million boxers. This list could be 1,000 people easily of what we embody. But I think when we're trying to talk about the elite, I think we've actually touched on some of the elite tough guys. Mike, I know you want to mention somebody. I'm going to go old school when it's my turn. So go ahead.
Sure. Well, when a guy like Jack Dempsey is quoted in the newspaper saying that he is possibly the greatest street fighter he has ever seen in his entire life, possibly the world, you kind of got to acquiesce and say, you know what, there's some merit behind that statement. So you got to go with Chuck Wiggins. Big partier, big drinker, real tough guy, filthy boxer, and he's somebody that there's newspaper articles if you Google him where he would not just beat up a cop, he would beat up several police officers in bar fights. He was just a mean SOB, and it's been stated in fights to where he was down on a scorecard, and I think it was Primo Carnera said he fouled him a few times, like in the groin area, and rather than go down and take a knee, and in the late rounds after being warned several times, he was saying that all Wiggins had to do was stay down. He knew he was losing a fight. He would have been a world champion. He just grunted, ate the blow, and continued the bout. He was an honorable guy in terms of fighting. When you guys were duking it out in the ring. But once he got that liquid courage in him, all he did was fight. He was found several times with cracked skull, and turning up in the hospital, in serious condition. And, even his death, I think the police department of Indianapolis got sick and tired of him and threw him down the stairs a few times. He died at 44, and he was just somebody that the powers that be got sick of dealing with, because of, the hell he was raising. But Chuck, when Jack Dempsey, gives you the seal of approval of being a legit badass, you got to ride with it.
I think, you can make an argument that we should be discussing Dempsey. I mean, he came up through that, and I just, I have an image in my head, and those western towns where he would, those mining towns, I mean, you're talking about some towns that, on weekends and stuff, when the guys got paid from the mines and stuff, they had money, disposable income money, and these sharp guys, these promoters figured out to bring out, boxing and stuff and take bets, and there was a whole atmosphere there. It's a lot of men, very few women. Nobody goes to a mining town and brings their wife, so I feel, it's like if there were women, I think, there was maybe, some business going on there, which happens and stuff. But that's a unique place to walk in and walk into a bar and cold and say, hey, anybody here? So we could be talking about Dempsey, and I agree. When Dempsey gives his seal of approval, I think it's a very meaningful thing. Chuck Wiggins is a good choice. I'm going to go ahead and take it back to that era as well, and I'm going to go with Ad Walgast.
Oh, wow.
Ad, he's a guy I've actually had the opportunity to see a lot of documentation on him. I was given, as part of the collection that we have down here, a box basically of newspapers and newspaper clippings on him and stuff. And everything about the guy tells you that he was made for fighting. It basically, the descriptions of his defensive style were just he puts his head down and lets you hit him on the top of the head, as he's coming in and he's going to slug it out. And of course, you've got the video proof of his fight with battling Nelson, where he actually won the World Lightweight Championship from Nelson. And Nelson was the guy who took it from Joe Gans, so you have to take into account a little bit of he beat the man that beat the man, and in a moment there, he was a huge celebrity with newspaper columns and this, that, and the other stuff. But at the same time, he always there are stories about him, for example, doing what fighters did back then. A lot of the times were vaudeville shows. There were tours and things. I've got some clips of him at a theater in Kansas City, and the next week they were entertaining Jack Johnson on his tour coming in. So he did those tour types things, and he hated it. He did not like doing any of that stuff. He considered first when they did the exhibitions, look out on the other end of the guy. It was usually a buddy of his named Hobo Doherty, who's also got a boxing record out there, that would do the exhibitions with him. And you had to look out because he literally, as many stories go, knocked him out, and the exhibitions were real fights for him because he just didn't distinguish very well. Walgast is another one of those massive boxing tragedies. I mean, just massive. But I think the facts around his deterioration also bolster my case. The guy is all about fighting. In his prime, I would want him in this fight with me because there was absolutely no quit in the guy. To the point, he died after let's call it decades, basically, in mental institutions. And to the end of the day, there's stories, there are many stories. First, he was living in California, and they hadn't put him in a mental institution yet. They had him working at one of the gyms there, and one of the promoters was taking care of him. And you could always find him out there running and practicing and doing his boxing and stuff. And if you stopped and talked to him, reporters, he was always talking about a comeback. And he did it into his older age and stuff. And it got to the point where when he started losing his faculties, they set him up, and they would always tell him, hey, you got to fight next week. You got to fight next week. But, next week never came, but it satisfied him. They kept him calm, and he worked. He was always looking forward for that next fight. He dies in a mental institution, still known for, they had to set up a room for him in the shadow box. And always just practicing and looking for a fight. And it's what he was made of. I mentioned battling Nelson. Nelson could be a guy you could put in this discussion. I mean, among all the stories of discussion of Nelson too, Nelson's a guy who won a headbutting contest. I don't even know how that. I guess you tie your hands behind your back and just go at it. I don't know how that works. I need more information on that. But
in this age of extreme sports, Big Al.
Yeah, exactly.
Take it to that?
Yeah, I think we could bring it back. Pay-per-view headbutt contest.
I think I go. I think I go to it.
I would want to see it live, absolutely. But the thing about watch the Walgast Nelson fight. If you haven't had an opportunity to see this thing, you got to take into account the video and the quality, and you got to take into account the era and things, and don't go in there and say, "Oh, Mayweather would kill him." That's not what I'm sending you to see this fight. But this is a brutal fight. Basically, the guys, Nelson, they had fought before, and Walgast considered that he won. I think he actually won on the record, or maybe the newspaper decision went his way and stuff. And he felt he won, and Nelson kind of had taken the fight as an exhibition or as a lesser fight, and he felt disrespected by Walgast. So he came in really looking forward to killing the guy, and he tried to do so. By the 20th round, that fight, under any circumstances, would have been stopped in any modern times whatsoever. Walgast was mauled, but slowly he came back and he took the fight away from Nelson, and it took into the 40-something round or something like that in order for the fight to stop. And it is considered, if you read the accounts from that time, an absolutely ghastly, brutal fight where both men were covered in blood at the end of the 40 rounds. And again, keep in mind too, they're fighting open air in a desert. Who knows, it had just rained, I think, if I recall my details and stuff, but now that the sun comes out with a particular heat, everybody in the audience is, probably smoking cigars, and these guys are fighting 40 rounds almost to the death. So I think Walgast is a guy I would take in there with me when he was in his prime. And,
yeah. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, you're talking about real men here.
I think there is an aspect of masculinity and macho, image to it. Yeah, and I think that, Walgast actually carried that with him. I think, some of his newspaper stuff and challenges and the way he was doing stuff, looking for fights and stuff. He didn't seem like the brightest guy in the world, but he definitely gets an A for effort.
Well, he entered a headbutt contest.
Well. He beat the guy with the headbutt, but I was impressed by him, and he's also one of those guys that I think is falling through the cracks of history too. When you talk about lightweights and stuff, in that era, after Walgast beat Nelson, he lost the belt relatively quickly, and it started getting handed from guy to guy. A lot of people held that belt, and there's an era there where I think all those guys deserve credit and memory. Freddie Welsh. Willie Ritchie, there's some very, very fighters that merit respect there, but it wasn't until Benny Leonard won that belt that it came back into prominence and wasn't considered something that was being handed around. And Walgast tends to fall through the cracks and be forgotten there, and I think that that's a shame. I am going to hand it off to Dave again. Dave, I think we got one more each.
Yes. So just a quick comment on Walgast. I mean, just mind-blowing stuff. how these older guys fought 40, 50, 60, 70 rounds is just utterly mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think it's a different mentality, you know.
Exactly.
I think society was different, you know. I think when they set up a 70-round fight, if we set up a 75-round fight now for anybody, two athletes that are prepared for that kind of stress, the outcry from people, the fighters themselves would hear, oh, no, you shouldn't do that, that's too much and stuff like that. There wasn't anybody talking about canceling these fights. They were still trying to make them sportive enough, but still try to retain that rawness of fighting in a field back then, you know? And
right.
So I think that the forefront guys, a guy like Walgas who in his day held a world title, you're talking about the toughest guys in the world.
Yes.
So we got one more guy. We got one more guy each, and I got a good one. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Dave though, because Dave's been hitting us with some more modern guys that you can't argue with either.
Okay, actually, my last one is a throwback, and a guy who just has to be there. Harry Greb, the Pittsburgh Windmill. Nearly 300 fights. He was 45-0 in 1919 alone. Only 3 less fights than Floyd has in his entire career. Faced 16 boxing Hall of Famers. We talked about Dempsey earlier, and Dempsey is definitely a guy who could be on this list, but he was a guy who was allegedly avoided by Dempsey, and Greb allegedly got the better of it in a sparring session that they had, and word is he split Dempsey's eye wide open. He wasn't above bending the rules and doing what he had to win. The guy fought virtually blind over the last 5 years of his career, and he fooled physicians by memorizing the letters on the eye chart. What he did, he savaged Gene Tunney in their first fight, beat the crap out of another tough guy, another guy who could be on this list, Mickey Walker, and allegedly the two of them went at it in a bar fight later that night.
Yeah, there's a lot of lore there.
I mean, what else can you say?
It's actually my other pick as well. To add on to what you said is he fought 16 Hall of Fame fighters. They're combined are for a total of 48 times, and he went 33-9-6 against them. That's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah,
it's incredible. And considering the fact that the last 5 years of his life, or 5 years of his fighting career, he was blind, and he only had 17 losses.
Right.
It's just the feat is incredible. When you look at it in its totality.
Yeah. So many of the I don't want to say many, but a good bit of real boxing experts that are around nowadays, more or less, the modern wave of people, they credit Greb as being the greatest of all time. He's got a lot of support for that. I'm trying to find. I'm pretty sure Greb has a couple of fights with Chuck Wiggins, who also made this list. So those must have been interesting little fights there. You guys both picked Greb, and it's interesting because now we got a couple of guys like Greb and Duran and stuff who are also elite fighters. Valero maybe would have been. Chuck Wiggins, really, I don't know that we'd name him an elite fighter, so we have a nice mix there. I'm going to go.
He was somebody that was respected by elite fighters.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you got those guys that are pros that have their place, and nobody can take them from them. I'm going to go on a different route on this next one, and I'm going to take Primo Carnera because I think one of the things I feel about Primo Carnera and looking back at it is I don't want to say underrated because he has his flaws and technical flaws, and obviously he was able to use his physicality and size a great deal, to his advantage and to actually get to the elite point and stuff. But what I want to point out is just that is here's a guy who they found because of his size, and they put him in this, and I don't know that he was a guy that would have chosen fighting. Like Chuck Wiggins probably would have chosen to fight, I don't know that Carnera was made that way. So now why would you bring him to a fight, an all-in fight type of thing? Look at what happened to this guy in the ring. The guy, even if his mentality was, I wouldn't do this, once the bell rang and the game was on, this guy was absolutely had no quit in him. And you're talking about a guy, because he was a giant, would walk into fights very unskilled against skilled guys who looked to beat that living crap out of him. You get a bigger guy like that, it's a target. People cut loose on this guy, and this guy got up off the canvas 4 or 5 times, and went on to win fights and kept fighting under those circumstances just almost throughout his career. Towards the end, obviously, the skill comes and he becomes a little bit better fighter and stuff. But I don't know that we could talk about him as anything but, like we talk about Dempsey or Tunney or any of those guys. That the period with Carnera, especially with the thoughts that some of his fights may have been produced and that he may have been built up and stuff, that all sullies his legacy, but it does not take away from the fact that when you watch, this guy went in there to take a beating from the best hitters in the world and then to try to do his thing and take it out. And the amount of punishment he took is transcendental in my book. And the way he did it without quitting and without doing that also is the essence of a man, I think, like that. Because here's a guy, like I said, that's the down period between Dempsey and Lewis, where everybody talks about how the heavyweight title was in a down period and things like that. And in America, we have that effect too, because obviously Carnera wasn't from here, and there was that feeling of almost like there is now of like the titles in Europe or something like that. And Carnera never got backed by, here he was considered just a flat-out bum and things like that. But the facts of the matter are, you're talking about a guy who fought almost 100 fights, and the strategy was always take a beating first, and then I will carry the day because you can't kill me.
Yeah, Miguel, as I think we can all agree, when a fighter's got a ton of miles on him, at the end of the odometer, they become a bum. And it's not that they were a bum their entire career, it's just that the car just started to fall apart. And like, as you had said, the beatings that guy took, it's inevitable. It's your body can only withstand so much. You add in time, age, and the skill level of the guys you're fighting. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
The guy was a punching bag from the beginning that did well for himself.
And as a world champion, in that era, there is a ton of documentation on it, especially if you want to head over and start looking at Italian newspapers and things like that, which, I probably need to do a lot more of, but I've dabbled in it a little bit. Just look at the guy's face. The guy is he's got that Harry Greb fighter face, the nose, the teeth, one eye looking one way, another eye looking the other. It's just, it's the guy went through wars, and he was impossible to kill, or put a finish to in many of those circumstances. So I was always impressed with Primo, and I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves.
Right. Who wants to get into a street fight with a guy who's 6'5", 6'6", and what was he, between 260 and 270?
Yeah, he was massive, especially now. You got to consider every offensive lineman in the NFL is bigger than him. You know what I mean? That's an exaggeration, but it almost isn't. You know what I mean? Certainly, every power forward in the NBA is bigger than him. So he was a giant for his time. And I don't want to put him over as a huge giant, that crosses time, because he'd be an average-sized heavyweight now. But yeah, that played into it. I think that set him up for when you're like a Jim Braddock or one of the other guys that's going in there and you're fighting a guy that much bigger than you. I don't think, I don't think those guys pulled punches or anything like that, but I don't think there was any warming up or let's jab and see how we do with this guy, or let me feel his power, I'm curious, or, whatever interchange is what occurs in the buildup of a fight. I don't think you had that with Carnera. I think a lot of the times these guys came out and just started slugging with all their might on him, and the guy had to take it from the very beginning.
Right.
Anyway, I think we had a good discussion. I think, like I said, I may pull in some other people to add to this, and so that we can have maybe a pool of tough guys. Maybe one day, it's funny. Dave with his simulator thing. That thing is addictive, man. I was running Oliver McCall versus Mitch Green yesterday for the kicks. So,
that's good. Maybe we got to do is compile these lists and stories, and then throw them into the simulator.
Yeah,
what happens.
We could certainly do some of that stuff here. We're running at about an hour already, and we've discussed the guys that we all came to the table with. So I'm going to just leave it at that. We'll see what kind of commentary we get, and I'm going to be looking for people to send me suggestions and guys we missed. We had some other mentions in here. Obviously, Dempsey got mentioned. Mickey Walker was mentioned, and a couple other extraneous guys. So we, anybody like a Chuck Wiggins, I know is maybe not as familiar to people as it is readily to you and to maybe a guy like Keith, because they're from the area in Indianapolis where he was from. If there are other local guys like that, people with a story and stuff like that, we'd love to hear him here on Talk and Shoot. So I'm looking forward to getting a little bit of feedback on this one. This was probably our most fun and most light podcast that we've had so far. So I appreciate Dave. I appreciate Mike. Guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Cool. Take it easy, guys. I'm gonna disconnect. Okay.